Hello everyone, welcome to this vlog where I share with you 5 basic landscape photography tips related to composition. These are more for beginner landscape photographers, but I'm pretty sure everyone can learn something from the examples that I have for you. Hey everyone, my name is Toma, Phototom here on YouTube. I'm a full-time landscape photographer since 2009, and this channel is all about landscape photography. So if you're interested in this kind of topic, make sure to subscribe for more similar videos. You can learn more about landscape photography, and you can also support me by buying my landscape photography ebook, or you can check out my editing courses. The link is in the description of this video on my website. You'll find all the details. Now let's start with this video and talk about these 5 beginner landscape photography tips related to composition. Tip number 1, it would be to stay really low. Now this is not something that you should always do when you're doing landscape photography, but there are occasions when staying really low can emphasize the subject, especially if you're using wide angle lengths, something like 16 millimeters or 17 millimeters up to 20 millimeters, let's say 24 ish, something like that, but this is top on a full frame body. If you have a certain type of subject, sitting really low can produce a really interesting perspective and a really dynamic frame. And let's look at some photos and you'll understand what I'm talking about. For example, here we have a waterfall, and if you look at the size of the leaves, you realize that the entire scene is not that big. It's a really small waterfall, but because I'm using a 17 millimeter lens, this emphasizes the foreground elements and diminishes the background elements. So sitting really low makes sense, and you get a feeling that this waterfall, it's much bigger than it really is. Another situation, it's another moment when I'm photographing water. Usually when I'm photographing water streams, I like sitting low because you have a true feel of the flow of the water. I don't know if it makes sense, but if you're staying really high and you're photographing a flowing water, it's not, I don't know, it's kind of, you kind of lose something. I don't know what you're losing, but something really doesn't work. And that's why over here in this photo you see it again. You see the foreground element, the rock, and the water that flows into the background. And third example, it's again a streaming water, and I'm sitting really low, and this way you get a better feeling of depth, of dimension. You have that, I mean, you kind of understand that the water goes into the background. You can have or you can produce interesting photos sitting really low, but in order to make sense for you to sit really low, you need an interesting starting point in your photo. It doesn't make sense to do this if it looks bad in the foreground of your photo. Tip number 2 is related to photographing trees. And my tip for you when you're photographing a tree is to look at different compositions inside the tree. So search for a composition inside the tree. Don't always write. Sometimes it makes sense to include the whole tree in your photo, but in many occasions it doesn't. In many occasions the tree is inside of the forest. It looks interesting, but you don't really have a true way of photographing it and present it to the viewer. So my approach to this is to find something interesting, find some an interesting point in the tree with the branches and the leaves, and focus only on that. And this is something that you can see in these photos. So I'm looking for the interesting visual element in that tree, the element that made me stop and look at that tree. And that is the only thing that I'm capturing. Tip number 3, and that is to follow the light. This is something that is pretty obvious, but in many occasions, especially during my workshops, because that is the moment when I interact a lot with a lot of photographers, and I'm seeing how they are reacting and adapting to the landscape in front of them. And there are numerous occasions when they don't understand how the light is shaping the landscape in front of them. For example, over here, I'm having the light going behind those rocks in front of you. But in the same time, the light highlights the edge of the rocks. And because of that, it looks really interesting. It looks pleasant. And also the light kind of makes the background fade away. So highlighting the edges of the rocks and making the background fade away, it can really bring the subject to your attention. Over here again, I'm having the sunset light, and I'm trying to find an exposure that will benefit the light, that will put the elements that are in that light in the face of the viewer, and everything else falls down into a little bit of darkness, but it looks okay. This is a more obvious example when I'm photographing the mountain in a beautiful sunset light. Tip number 4 is related to leading lines, and leading lines I think are the most powerful concept when it comes to composition. You need to understand them. You need to understand how big a leading line should be in the frame in relation to your subject. This is something that I talk a lot in my ebook, for example, and I show you different case studies, and I talk about why in a certain moment you need a leading line of a certain dimension, and then you need some other leading lines, supporting leading lines of smaller dimensions. So you need to find an equilibrium. I explain this a lot in my ebook. But for example, in this photo, I'm having a long leading line in the edge of this hill, or in this one I'm having a trail that goes into the distance. Over here, the clouds can be a leading line. The edges of the hills are leading lines. Everything that has a certain contrast, has a certain flow, and it leads the attention of the viewer to the subject. Now, what you need to pay close attention is not having strong leading lines, strong in a visual term, that will guide the attention of the viewer in a completely different area of the photo. Over here we have a beautiful trail that goes into the distance. Or here I'm having a zigzag created by the stream of the water, the edge of the rocks. So you are controlling the journey of the viewer inside your photo with your leading lines. So pay close attention to those. And tip number 5, the last tip that I have for you today, is when you are inside of a forest, try and find simple compositions. Like for example, here I'm having only these 2 trunks, and I'm using the fog to put the background in a little bit of blur and mist. And then I'm having this photo with the yellow tree, or this one when I'm focusing on one element, and I'm using the fog to make the background a little bit blurry, or make it make the entire forest landscape a lot simple. I'm getting rid of the chaos in very simple words. That was it, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something from it. If you have questions, use the comment section below. Don't forget that you can learn more about landscape photography, and you can also support me by buying my landscape photography ebook. It's so strange to advertise yourself, but I guess it is what it is. Well, until next time, keep on photographing because it's the only way that you can get better. Thanks for watching and bye bye.